Hey folks, Roland Martin here and welcome to my YouTube channel. You know, for years I had really a big deal with selling this book. It's not on the market anymore, but we sold 140,000 copies of this book. In fact, Winchester Press, when they published it, they said it was the second most successful book they ever had. I said, well, what was the first most successful book? And they said, well, it was a book on bird watching. So I guess there's more bird watchers than our bass fishermen. But anyway, this has been a really big deal. It says it's 101 bass catching secrets, but it's really 101 patterns. And I got into this pattern idea even before this book. Back when I was at Santee Cooper, I did a deal right here, and this is an old map. And it's way back in the 60s when, and this was $1.90, $1.50. It was Roland Martin's fishing guide map on Santee Cooper. It first defined patterns. It was really one of the only fairly descriptive pieces of literature that ever dealt with the pattern and what it was and how it's made up and what you look for when you're trying to pattern fish. And I defined this 50, 60 years or 70 years ago, I don't know, a long time ago, and it's the same today. In other words, a pattern, a bass fishing pattern, is the exact set of water and cover conditions that attract fish to that particular spot and other similar spots all around the lake at the same time. So it's an exact set of water and cover conditions. The temperature of the water, the clarity of the water, the depth of the water, the structure of the water, you know, all the parameters, the pH of the water, the wind, the clarity of the sky, the moon phases, all that is part of a pattern. And basically all you're doing is trying to catch a fish. When you do catch a fish, here's the whole deal. You try to analyze everything that's there. It's not really hard work. I'll usually start off in the morning, and I usually go to points. That's just kind of an average kind of way to go. And I'll go to a point, and I'll look for something on the point. It could be an old rock. It could be a piece of grass. It could be a log. It could be a drop-off. I don't know what I'm looking for, but I'm casting around different places and doing different things until finally, hopefully, I catch a fish. And when I do, maybe there's a pattern here. I don't know. You know, we'll check it out. Well, I threw it out there, and I counted about 10 seconds, and sure enough, there's a little drop-off here. And there's a stump here, too, and the water's pretty clear. Well, maybe there's another point right over there that might have the same conditions. And sure enough, maybe it did have the same conditions, or maybe we catch another bass. Well, that's kind of how you work a pattern. But that being said, pattern fishing is all depends on the type of bite you get in the first place. In other words, are you a power fisherman? Do you like to fish light tackle? Are you a finesse fisherman? Do you fish just strictly for feeding fish? Are you a boat dock fisherman? Are you a stump fisherman? Are you a whatever kind of fisherman? So there's all different kinds of different scenarios that you can get working with pattern fishing, and hundreds of them. I just happen to list 100 there. But one of the main considerations when I'm doing this as a power fisherman, and that is I'm using heavy tackle, like this kind of stuff, 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 pound test line. I'm looking for mainly a fish that I can catch on reflex action. Let me explain what reflex action is. There's really 9 reasons or 10 reasons why bass bite in the first place. You know, understandably, they're hungry. They bite there, and they're protecting their nest. Maybe that's right for that reason. They get angry. You know, that's another reason. They bite out of competition when there's a whole big school, and then there's other reasons. But finally, we get down to the reflex action. That's the most important way we catch fish. I don't care if you're using a forward-facing sonar in the modern world, or if you're old school like some of us that we're just throwing with the polarized glasses to a stump. I don't care what you're doing, but it's reflex action that triggers most of the strikes that you get. I figured that, okay, in a day's time, maybe 5% of the time, I'm getting hungry fish. And then about 45% of the time, I'm catching reflex action fish. And then maybe I'm catching angry fish because I'll throw a half a dozen times to a spot a few percent of the time. And then maybe there's a spawning bass around, so that's because of the spawning nature, you know, I catch one there. Or maybe there's a school of bass, and because of another 10 or 15%, I catch them because of that. But the main majority of the time, maybe half the time, or it could be 3/4 of the time, I'm catching them on reflex action. Now, let me explain what reflex action is. You know, let's just take a hypothetical situation. You're out on the end of this point, and there's a stump there. Now, the stump, okay, that kind of attracts bass. They like to find an ambush point, a kind of place to hide. And so there'll be a fish kind of cruising around that stump. It's a nice little place to kind of hide. That's not the only reason why he's there, but let's explain that right now. Now, the more isolated that stump is, the fact that there's just one stump on the point makes it more attractive to the fish than if there was 2,000 stumps. There might be, that same bass would be there on the same point, but there's 2,000 stumps, so which stump do you cast to? But if that's one bass is on the point and there's only one stump there, he's going to be by that stump. Okay, so the isolated structure like that stump might be a really big deal. Now let's talk about some other considerations before we make that cast and before we get that reflex action strike. Let's talk about the biology of the fish. First of all, he has no eyelids. You know, he can't close his eyes, and he's very sensitive to the sun. And so he needs shade. Now they can swim out in the sun some, yeah, they can do that, but eventually they try to find shade. I mean, for the most part, their comfort zone is in the shade. They'll go back and forth in the sun some, but most of the time they try to seek shade for the majority of their time, particularly if it's an ambush point and they're sitting there waiting for something to come by. They're going to be in the shade of that stump. Now, another consideration, let's talk about the current. Now you'd say, well, I'm going to fish a lake. There isn't a current in the lake. There's current in a lake. Every single time the wind blows, I don't care how slight, there is some kind of current in the lake. And if you look, I used to smoke cigarettes, and I don't smoke cigarettes anymore. But the only good thing about smoking a cigarette that I ever had, when I'd come to a stump, I'd take my cigarette and just kind of flick the ashes and watch the ashes go down, and you'd see them kind of drifting one way or the other. It'd slowly drift one way. Well, no, bass can't swim backwards. Well, they don't like to swim backwards. They can swim backwards a little bit, but it's an effort for them. So what they want to do is face the little bit of current that's there. Say the wind's blowing, and in general, in the shallow water, the wind, that upper layer of water, is usually the area that the wind's pushing, and in the lower area is usually going back the other way. But anyway, that shallow water up on that stump is probably, facing the wind is facing the current. Okay, so now we got them there by the stump, and let's go one step farther. Let's make him a big bass. Let's make him a real trophy. You know, he's over 6 pounds now. That's really a good one. So let's get a big 6-pound bass up by a stump. So he's on the shady side. So the sun's over here, a little bit of shade over here. Okay, we can kind of place him there, and then now he's going to be facing the current. Now, why I'm saying this is I'm getting back to an old deal. I was fishing one time down in I was fishing in Key Biscayne, Florida, with old Bill Curtis. He was an old saltwater guide, and we were fishing for bonefish. And he said, now Roland, he says, the main thing about these bonefish, when we spot them, don't throw on their head. Don't throw right on top of them. He said, if you throw too close to them, you'll scare them every time. And I said, well, why is that? They're kind of a saltwater fish. He said, they're real skittish. They're real scary. He said, in fact, you throw on a barracuda, it'll scare them away. You throw on top of a shark, it'll scare them away. You throw on top of a pike in the northern countries, it'll scare them away. Throw on top of a muskie, it'll scare them away. So I'm just saying these big predator fish and muskies and sharks and stuff all can be scared away with a cast right on top of them. So he said that. And he said, Roland, you're supposed to be some kind of an expert. You know, you go out there and fish all these tournaments and do real good. He says, you ought to be able to throw exactly where I tell you. So be sure to throw in front of the bonefish. The bonefish should be coming along like this in front of the bonefish, about 10 feet. Blah, blah, blah. He had it all worked out. Well, anyway, first bonefish should coming along. The wind's blowing. He hadn't let me cast for hours. I've just been sitting there waiting to make a cast. And no, don't cast. Well, the bonefish might come along. So I'm kind of a little rusty. I haven't practiced much. So I'm sitting there. I haven't fished. But he said, there's a bonefish, 1 o'clock. Well, now when you say In saltwater, we say 1 o'clock is here, 2 o'clock is here, 3 o'clock is here, 4 o'clock is here, 5, 6. That's 12 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock. If he says bonefish 1 o'clock, it's this way. Well, I know that. That's just how we communicate in saltwater. Bonefish 11 o'clock, it's that way. Okay. Bonefish 6 o'clock, it's right behind you. Okay. Anyway, he said bonefish 1 o'clock, and so I'm looking. He says 40 feet, and sure enough, I see him kind of coming along. He said, I want you to lead him just right and get in front of him about 10 foot with that lure. I think I was throwing a little jig with a shrimp on it. He said, okay, throw that out there. And I throw it at the last minute, the wind kind of caught it, and it kind of fell right pretty much on top of the bonefish. And boom, he blew out of there and swam away. And he took his cap and started hitting me with it. He said, that was the worst cast. You're supposed to be some kind of an expert. That was horrible. He said, that wasn't a good cast at all. And so I said to him, I said, well, you hadn't let me fish all day. I've been just sitting here waiting to cast, and every time I try to make a practice cast, you'd say, no, wait, we might scare a fish or something. So anyway, I made some better casts, and I finally caught some bonefish, and everything was fine. But the whole point was, you don't want to throw on top of them. And that could be a bass. And here we are in some lake, say Lake Sidney Lanier in Georgia, and it's been raining, and the sun's not real bright, and all of a sudden the water's dingy, and you can't see them. But hardly ever do we just see bass. Hardly ever do we just pull up to a point and see the stump. Oh, there's a bass. That's not what happens. It's usually if you see a bass, well, he's spooked out. The water's too clear. Most of the time we pull up on that point, and it's kind of dingy. The water's moving a little bit, and the sun's kind of bad. And even with polarized glasses, you might see the stump, but it's very difficult to see the bass. So we don't often see the bass. We have to just assume that he's there, facing the current, in the shade of the stump, and we're assuming one step farther, we're kind of playing a game and say, oh, that's a big one. It's a great big one. So let's make the right cast. Now here's the whole thing about reflex action, and everybody said, Roland, you went right behind 2 or 3 other boats, and you won that tournament. And why I won it was for the proper placement of a cast. I was thinking about these terms, just exactly how's that fish relating to that stump. That makes all the difference in the world in reflex action strikes. I'd take a spinnerbait, like this is the old Red Man spinnerbait by Jimmy Houston. It's just a great lure. It's 3/8 of an ounce, and it throws really well. I got it on 50-pound braid. And I can do this on Lake Okeechobee. I can do it on any kind of lake in Florida. I can do it anywhere, but we just happen to be on stumps right now. So what I do with the stump is I visualized all this stuff in my mind. I see the stump. I just imagine there's a fish there. He's facing that way. So what I do, I can do a little pitch cast. That's one, but probably I'll just do a little overhand cast, and I'll go through past him now. I don't want to throw in his face or head. I throw past the spot, and I just slow roll the spinnerbait right where I think his face is, maybe 3 or 4 inches out in front of him. And if I'm right, and I got him positioned just right, that bass, being the predator he is kind of like a cat. You know, a cat is just laying there. If you take a ball and roll it right by the cat, what'll he do? Half the time he'll just reach out and grab it. I mean, that's reflex action for a cat. That's a predator instinct. That's something that animals do, particularly predator animals like a big bass or a big cat. You roll a ball by a cat, but you roll that same ball by his tail, and he doesn't see it coming and hits his tail, he's going to take off running. So, okay. So that's the ball and the cat. With this same thing with a spinnerbait in front of that fish. You come right in front of his face. Now just think of the thousands of times, and the thousands of times I did it, where I'd throw it, I didn't even think about the sun. I didn't even think about the wind. I just throwing it at a stump. Oh, there's a stump, I throw it at. Just any which way. And sure enough, half the time I'd be right, or maybe a third of the time I'd be right. A third of the time I'd be wrong, and the other third of the time they wouldn't hit anyhow. But anyway, the point is, by imagining where the fish is each and every time that you throw, there's so much more efficiency there. So I can go behind somebody in a big national tournament, possibly win the tournament simply because I'm more efficient. I'm not scaring the fish on half the cast. I'm getting right in front of their eyes. I'm getting that reflex action strike. maybe half the fish I catch, or that kind of thing. Now I got kind of a 1-2 punch on the whole deal. This happens to be the Red Man spinnerbait, but you can throw a little small crankbait. That would be a good one. A little Rapala kind of thing, a little jerk bait. That would be another kind of deal. You could throw a worm like a salty sink. I'm using those salty sinks now. That's a perfect combination. But it's kind of a 1-2 deal. I like to start off with something fast, like a spinnerbait or a chatterbait or a crankbait, because you can cover a lot of water and you can keep moving pretty fast. And looking, there's a stump, there's a stump. And once I got it figured out, all the wind and stuff, I can kind of quickly throw to the right spot, or pretty much the right spot. This could be a clump of grass. It could be a lily pad. It could be any number of things. Okay, now for the 2 punch, the 1-2 punch, is I love a jig. This happens to be a new little jig that I'm using now from Fish Lucky, and it's got their little tail. It's their little crawfish tail. This happens to be a 3/8 of an ounce jig. This is the perfect backup for a stump. I love to fish stumps. And so this happens to be 50-pound tested. By the way, I got the new tackle now. I got my new lose reel and my new lose rod. I'm just set to go. New 50-pound test braid. So now, if I make a cast, and I'm gonna be real kind of I might have seen a flash. I might have gotten a boil. I might have missed a fish. Or I might just say, it looks like such a good stump, let me do a backup with the jig, and I'll just either pitch it in like that, and my pitching's good to about 30 feet, and pretty accurate. And I'm low to the water, and I can just I practice all the time. I'll take my hat, and I'll put out there 30, 40 feet away, and I get where, I get my lure and my reel all adjusted, I get where I can hit the hat almost every cast. And that's a real quiet presentation. Then I can drop it right by that stump, just a quiet presentation. I got the rod in my stomach, and I got the power I need to set the hook hard, and I got that accuracy. It's much more accurate than an overhead cast, because an overhead cast, it comes flying into the water, making a big splash, making a lot of noise, and it doesn't have the accuracy. So there's two things against the overhead cast compared to a good pitch. A good pitch is more accurate, a quiet presentation, and I'm ready to go. And so that's my backup 1-2 punch. Anyway, that's kind of my method of, people say, well, gosh, you've set records and won anglers of the year and all sorts of things like that, and set records in bass, and it was a lot of luck. Yeah, it was a lot of luck. Yeah. I had luck, plenty of luck. But I capitalized on luck, and I was prepared. I had a game plan, and my rod's all ready to go. I'm looking with my polarized glasses. I know exactly what I'm looking for. Now, the luck comes in that you finally look upon a spot where there's a whole bunch of fish. But if you're properly prepared with the luck that you get, hey, you'll capitalize on the luck and catch a whole bunch of fish and win the tournament. So luck's a big deal. I expect to find luck. But I'm prepared to find luck. I'm prepared to do something with it when I find it. Anyway, that's kind of my whole game plan for fishing tournaments, at least to establish a pattern. Now, that establishing a pattern is such a big deal, because that could have been a stump, it could have been a drop off, it could have been any number of things that pattern could have represented. That same 1-2 punch could have been 100 things. But anyway, that's kind of how I do it. And I have a lot of fun in doing it, because it gives you more anticipation. The more you anticipate, then the more confidence you get. In other words, oh boy, I'm going to catch one here. I like to say, and I'll even bet with my partners, I'll bet you $1 or something. And okay, I'm going to a really good looking spot. And I do it on camera. You've seen me do it a lot of times. That's such a good looking spot. The pattern conditions are so perfect. I'll bet you I'm going to catch one. And sure enough, often I do. But when I say that and do that, I'm more prepared. I've checked my knot. I'm making a good cast. I'm prepared for setting the hook just right. And so when you got the confidence and all that and self-assurance, then you catch more fish. It just happens, and you do better in the tournament. Well, anyway, that's my technique, and that's my pattern information for the day. And hey, thanks for watching. Hey, hit that likes button, because all these people like Booyah, and I just cleaned my boat just an hour ago, and that's my cleaning products. And then all my new sponsors like the Lose rods and reels that I have now, and of course the Fish Lucky products, and of course Bass Pro Shop. You can't get that. Spike It. I just have some great sponsors. So hit that likes button. When you do, they're happy. We'll see you again soon. Thank you.